have about 45 athletes and some sponsors.
Okay.
And I usually send these videos out to the sponsors and athletes afterwards so they can watch them at another time. Like I have one athlete who's a radiologist. He's on call right now, so he asked if I could send this to him afterwards. So I usually send it out to the team afterwards and send it to the sponsors so they can listen in and have videos for fun and to try to learn as well. So um,
Cool.
yeah, I'll just wait another minute and then we'll rock and roll. I see John's on here. John's the other manager of the team.
What's going on, guys?
Hey, John. Meet Jack.
How's it going?
It's going really well. Looks like you're tuning in from your van. Is that it?
Truck camper.
Truck camper. Okay, got it.
Yeah. A little,
Are
little bit
you?
more, a little more rugged and, unrefined in the van lifestyle.
Got
But,
it. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to group you into
no, no,
into the
that's
group
okay.
with those individuals.
Yeah. People. Yeah.
All right, I guess I'll start, John, because I feel like there's a lot of questions I'm going to want to ask, and this is going to be a super interesting conversation. So I'll just start. I press record, so as people come in, we'll go. But thanks everyone for coming. Welcome. This is our first talk of the year. We'll try to do 4 talks, so a talk every month until April, and they'll all be on different things. But I was really excited to get Jack on here. I've been perusing his Instagram for a while now. I don't know if your mom told you, but I was introduced to you through your mom because I was working out with her at New Milford Sports Club. And your
Yeah.
mom's a sick athlete too. Like no joke. In terms of the long distance swims, and she just did that bike tour around Europe.
Yeah.
So that must be where the genetics come from. But his mom's an incredible
I
swimmer.
think so. That's for sure.
We'll give it to her. How about that? We'll give it to her.
Yeah, definitely.
But I started swimming with your mom maybe 2017, 2016.
Mhm.
And your mom actually texted me the other day because a common friend, and I don't know how many people on the team know this, but one of our athletes passed away last Wednesday. His name was Tom Taza. And he joined the team when we started this team, but he really couldn't join because he was dealing with pancreatic cancer. So he bought the uniform and bought some things, and he wasn't able to come to any group events, but he finally passed away last Wednesday. And he was really great friends with your mom. They would go to Lake Quassapag and swim open water together all the time. And he was one of the fastest athletes for his age group at the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon in San Francisco. And he was always up there with one of the first people out of the water in his age group. He was a great swimmer. He went to Southern Connecticut State University and swam there. I think his events were the butterfly and IM. And he did swim across the sound a couple times. He was a great athlete. So I just got a text from your mom the other day, just talking about Tom a little bit and catching up. So that was nice to catch up with her.
It's crazy. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, thank you. But on the brighter side, we have you here. And everyone, this is Jack Kuenzle. And I think of you as an ultra runner extraordinaire, absolute beast. I didn't know much about you until you just sent me your bio on the internet. So now I feel like a complete underachiever after reading your bio, and that you went to Yale University and that you did time with the U.S. Navy and basic underwater demolition SEAL training. I think your mom told me that your sister was and maybe a branch of the military as well. Did your sister go to Yale as well?
She was in ROTC briefly. Yeah, she was in ROTC briefly, and then she had some medical issues her senior year, so she was basically disqualified before she commissioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would love to hear some of that. I think I first started talking to Jack when I saw he was doing some ultra stuff online, and I don't know if I talked to you before I did the Appalachian Trail run. I probably should have. I probably would have a better run if I talked to you. But we do have a lot of ultra marathoners and ultra cyclists and things like that on the team. So I think they're really excited to hear your words of wisdom and how you train and how you eat, how you drink, volume, intensity. So I'd love to go into that a little later. But maybe you could just start with a little introduction, like you have on your bio of how you grew up and maybe how you got involved in this, and then we can go into some of the more fun details like the 7 presidential peaks and all the different FKTs and things you have.
Yeah, so Jack Kuenzle, I was born in Dallas originally. I grew up in Roxbury, Connecticut, and then grew up. I did some. My dad is a pilot for Delta, so I did some kind of long distance. I was traveling a lot. I ended up in kind of late high school and college. I did some like long distance, self-supported like cycling trips, either by myself or with other people, kind of around. I did some in like Western Africa. I did some in like Central Asia, and like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, on a bicycle primarily. And then yeah, I went to college at Yale. Uh, I did ROTC. I commissioned in the Navy, and then in May of 17, I went to BUDS, which is the basic training pipeline for uh, Navy SEALs. I went through that, graduated SEAL training, became a SEAL in November 2018, and for that I was primarily, it was a lot of lifting, it was a lot of running, a little bit of swimming training for that. I going into college, I weighed probably my junior year, or sophomore year, I was like 6'2", like 160 pounds, and then by mid senior year, I was like same height, 6'2", like 220. So I put on a ton of weight for that. I was lifting a ton, running some, went through that, cut down to like 205, and then end of training, I decided to run, start competing in running, and so I cut down a little further. So I was sit at about like 180 now. But yeah, so I did a 50 miler in 2018. I didn't really love it all that much. But then I started kind of climbing some of not really climbing, but just kind of like class one, just like walk ups in Southern California, some different peaks out there that are basically just an ultra distance just to get up and down them because there's just so much prominence. So like San Jacinto outside of Palm Springs was one that I was doing a lot that I really fell in love with. That's like 50K and about 10,000 feet of vert. So I got into that. I did some ultras in 2019. Still wasn't a huge fan. Deployed to Bosnia in 2020, and I started doing a bunch of FKTs over there. And then I came back to the U.S. and I wanted to try to in a single year set fastest known times on what I thought were the 5 most competitive day technical mountain hike run kind of efforts. So in my mind, that was in New Hampshire, the Pemigewasset Loop, the Presidential Traverse and the Hut Traverse, and then in New York, the Devil's Path and the Great Range Traverse. So I went up there cold. I'd never run up there, and I tried to do the Pemi Loop, and I set the unsupported record on it, but really the supported record was essentially unsupported. So by technicality, I set a record, but I was really 7 minutes over the time I was shooting for. And then I managed to set the following summer. I went up and I trained each one very intentionally. And I set the fastest time on the Devil's Path, and then the Great Range Traverse in the Adirondacks, then the Presidential Traverse, and then the Hut Traverse. And I finished out the year racing the 100 miles of the Appalachian Trail and the White Mountain National Forest, which there's not really a good mountain. There's no good mountain 100 milers on the East Coast. Honestly, in like the real mountain category, in my mind, for 100 milers is over 30,000 feet of gain in descent over 100 miles. And the only ones that fall into that are like Ouray 100, which is it's a really stupid course out in Colorado, and Hard Rock 100, which is famous but very difficult to get into because it's only a lottery and the Forest Service keeps it super small. So those are really the 2 real races in the U.S. So I was looking to kind of establish something on the East Coast, and some other people had done it, but I went and tried to do this White Mountain 100 miler in under 24 hours, and ended up bailing. I was on pace, but I bailed at about 70 because my feet just all the skin was kind of sloughing off on the bottom. It was just very painful to run. Yeah, so since then I got out of the Navy, and now I coach for uphill athlete. So I coach like mountaineering and trail running for them.
That's quite
So
a bio. There's a lot to unpack there. Can you explain what uphill athlete is real quick?
yeah, so Steve House, I'd never heard of him, but Steve House is probably one of the best kind of like alpine mountaineers in the world. Um, and he was really big in kind of the early 2000s. And while he was training for kind of alpine climbing, somehow he got connected to Scott Johnson, who was a coach on the U.S. Olympic cross country ski team. And they got together and they built this training protocol, and they wrote a book called Training for the New Alpinism. And they just kind of were thinking it was going to end there, and they ended up founding this company, Uphill Athlete. So Uphill Athlete, they have a podcast, they have a ton of free resources on their website, and they also provide paid coaching. Um, and so primarily it's a mountaineering focus what they do, but they're starting to get more into kind of like ultra running or steeper mountain running.
Okay.
So I write a little bit for the website and then coach for them.
So,
So
so now I'm thinking in my mind, what's the difference between mountaineering and ultra running? I think maybe some people would think, oh, if I go do hard rock or I'm going ahead and I'm running up and doing around Kilimanjaro, is it the same as ultra running? Like maybe you could explain
mhm.
or differentiate what the differences between those two?
Yeah, so it's gonna depend a little bit. There's a lot of mountaineering that's just walk-ups. There's no technical skills required. I would say the biggest difference is the technical skills, the rope skills that you're gonna need. Um, as far as the physicality, some mountaineering does require upper body strength because there's mountaineering that's done where you're doing technical fifth class rock climbing. Uh, Beyond that, mountaineering is generally is going to be longer, and it's going to be lower intensity, and it's going to be more it's going to be more strength based because you're going to be carrying kind of heavier packs, heavier loads,
Sure.
uh, and then it's all going to be on steeper terrain.
Interesting. So how much anaerobic training do you actually do? Or is a lot of the methodology low aerobic zone training?
Yeah, so I do zero now. I don't do any anymore now. My When I was training for those efforts over the summer, I was doing quite a bit of anaerobic work. Um, but just kind of recently, I sat down with Scott because I plan on just racing kind of at the 100-mile distance in 2022, and I sat down with Scott and we came up with a training plan. And yeah, pretty much all uh, low intensity aerobic work except for what uphill athlete refers to as like muscular endurance training. And so essentially I'm just doing like once a week weighted work with like a pack on like a stairmaster is what I use um for that. But no, I do zero anaerobic work now.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I wonder if there would be any anaerobic work in going uphill. I mean, depending on how fast you're climbing, if your heart rate's going above 160, 170, or
Yeah.
do you train based off of heart rate? And I mean, some people I guess would consider that anaerobic work because your heart rate's up that high, even though you're walking. And I could imagine that it would get up that high if you're storming uphill.
No, so kind of depends a little bit. So yeah, so on the heart rate question, I didn't used to train with heart rate, but since Uphill Athlete does use heart rate for a lot of their coaching, I've started to use it just so I can understand it a little bit better.
Okay.
Uh, but the muscular endurance work that I do, um, part of the goal is to keep the heart rate lower, is to train with a heavy enough weight on a steep enough grade where you're kind of like your aerobic system, your cardiovascular system isn't the limiter. All the limiter is muscular and it's in your legs.
Sure.
So when I do that, my heart rate, I just did it a couple days ago at like, in near Tahoe at like 6,000 feet. I don't think that probably makes a big difference for heart rate, but super, super hard session for an hour on a Stairmaster with 50 pounds. And I got to look, but I don't think my heart rate got above 160.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I can, uh, even doing the White Mountain 100-miler. I mean, so I think there is more of a role for the anaerobic system If you were to go out and I think to do a flat 50 miler, the anaerobic system would have very little involvement. Like it would take an elite athlete for like a flat 50 miler, like maybe mid 5 hours. Um, Whereas if you were to do an effort in the mid 5 hours on really steep terrain, so maybe like a little bit more than the Great Range Traverse, I think the anaerobic system plays a much bigger role because the terrain is so steep that those downhills are really low intensity. So essentially, you're like sprinting all the uphills and just kind of cruising and recovering on all the downhills. That was my kind of personal take, and that's why I trained a fair amount anaerobic for those efforts over the summer. But I think for the White Mountain 100 miler or something like Hard Rock, uh, no, I think it's all aerobic at that kind of length of effort, not to 20 hours. I don't think there's any anaerobic involvement.
Yeah, it's funny. That's always something I've thought about because I know I think about Killian Jornet, and obviously he's an absolute monster and an absolute beast. But you can see how fast he can run a vertical kilometer, or how fast he probably
Yeah.
could do a mile sub 5. So
Yeah,
for sure.
thought in the back of my head, you know, even though these long distance 50 milers, 100 milers are very aerobic, you have one of the best mountain runners in the world who's an exceptional anaerobic athlete as well. So is there
Yeah.
any benefit in trying to push that top end in the anaerobic, and is that going to serve to an even larger anaerobic base? It's always been a question in the back of my head.
Yeah, Killian, I mean, Killian is a very good. He's very good. I mean, he's the best in the world, like shorter than 50 miles. But I think over 50 and towards 100, I mean, I don't think this is like super controversial to say, but I think there are other people that are faster than him, as certainly at the 100-mile distance. And I think partially that is because he focuses on the shorter, high intensity. At least he has recently, the higher intensity stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
he finds it fun.
but he was able to dominate the 100-mile scene years ago, but a lot of the times that he ran, like, his course record at Hard Rock would not have been he would have like come in third or fourth. Am I crazy? This last year.
Okay.
Um,
Wow.
so yeah, I mean, he just trains more towards the shorter stuff.
And
Um,
is that on your viewpoint or your agenda for the upcoming year? Do you what do you see yourself doing in 2022?
yeah. So, I'm training a lot of ski mountaineering right now, both because it's super good cross training for running, and it kind of gives me my soft tissues and bones a little bit of a break from the kind of repetitive
Sure.
impact of running. So I'm training skiing right now, and then psychologically, it's also a huge break too. So I probably wouldn't be able to do as much volume year round if I wasn't transitioning over to skiing. But so training skiing right now, and I might try to go for the ski record on Hood and on Shasta. Uh, I was actually trying to do it this week for on Hood, but the conditions just weren't there. But I'm not training to those at all. I'm focusing on 100-mile training and racing doing the White Mountain 100 miler again in I think in late June, whenever the snow melts out. I mean, there's not a lot of snow up there right now, so potentially even earlier. But late June was the time I kind of discussed with some people up there who kind of knew the weather in the snowpack. And then probably just like 2 months after that, uh, run the Hard Rock course for time. So race it with Hard Rock rules, with like the Hard Rock aid stations, with like the same things that would be available, and race probably the course record from 2021. I
Wow.
mean, yeah,
You're gonna have to keep us posted because that's an exciting summer. That's an exciting year. I want to be
yeah,
updated.
yeah, yeah. I just can't crash and break my legs right now or tear
Well,
my ACLs.
so I,
Uh,
I totally get what you're saying with the cross training because I've seen you on a bicycle before too, so I know that you're on a bike. And when I got my
yeah,
first gravel bike, I felt like it was a vacation compared to the road bike. Like I almost felt like my triathlon bike and my road bike was the job. And then all of a sudden when I got on trails and got on the gravel bike, it was like vacation. So
yeah,
I'm sure that when you're talking about that mental relief, that
yeah.
I can
Huge, huge.
relate to it, and it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
So, I personally would love to hear more about your FKT with the Presidential Peaks and Devil's Path, and maybe you could talk a little bit about, and you don't have to give us details, but I'm sure the
Oh,
athletes really love to hear explanation of how you look at volume and how you look at intensity, and then how you go into a taper, looking at when you're gonna go ahead and do these attempts. So what the taper looks
yeah.
like, and then maybe a little bit of what you're thinking about during the actual attempt, like mindset during what we would consider a race, and for you would be considered an attempt. So training leading up to it, volume, intensity, a taper, and then going into maybe one of those events.
Oh God.
That's too big of a
Yeah.
question.
No, not at all. Let me just think for a second. I mean, I have the virtue of not having a lot else going on in my life, so I can just do this, all the time. What I found for me personally is that volume is very important and it helps me out a lot. And so what I was training what I was training last year going into those attempts was I think between about February, March. So I raced the Devil's Path. I raced something down in Virginia in early April. I raced the Devil's Path in mid-May. Uh, February, March, or yeah, February, March. Okay, let me think. So last December and January, I was doing weighted. I was actually doing muscular endurance work in the gym. So uphill athlete has like a muscular endurance protocol that's basically just high rep lower body exercises with a small amount of rest, a lot of it's like jumping lunges, jumping squats, uh, step ups. So I was doing that for a couple of months, and I was averaging probably about 20 hours a week of training with that. And what that looked like was probably a 7 hour long run on Saturday, 5 hour long run on Sunday, one off day, and then amongst those 4 days, one of them would be the muscular endurance day, so that would probably take like an hour, uh, and then the other 7 hours just kind of split amongst those other 3 days.
Okay.
And a lot of the work that I would do in Virginia Beach, because I wasn't living anywhere where there was mountains, so I'd have to drive out on the weekends and run on the AT up in Appalachia. And a lot of the work I did in Virginia Beach is I would run on the flats for kind of just kind of like working on running economy mainly,
Sure.
and a little bit because I couldn't do any down have some sort of impact on my quads because I couldn't do any downhill in Virginia Beach, so that was kind of a disadvantage. And then a lot of my work though was just on the stairmaster and on the uphill treadmill because if I had attempted to do that level of volume if I'd attempted to do that level of volume on flat trails, I absolutely would have gotten injured. Um, Doing it all on the asphalt would have been an absolute disaster. Killian's like a big advocate for like training higher volume on the trails because, just because of especially more technical trails, every foot placement is a little bit different,
Sure.
and there isn't quite the repetitive use that there is running on the road. So
Proprioception and all that.
and certainly, and then I would do a lot of my volume on an uphill treadmill or on a stairmaster because there's very very little impact. So that's kind of able how I was able to stack so much volume. But then I would say March, April, May, I averaged about 24 hours a week of training, and that would work out to be one kind of zone 3 session per week. So that would either be all my speed work was done on the incline treadmill, and so I'd have one session that would be between 60 and 80 minutes of work probably, and that would be either one longer interval or um 6 to 8 intervals of 8 to 12 minutes in length, with 2 to 3 minutes of rest in between those.
And
And then
you were running on the incline of the treadmill?
on the incline at 25%. I did all my workouts at 25% on the incline
Wow.
treadmill.
A lot of
Uh,
treadmills don't go above 15%.
yeah, I was lucky. I found one There's one I found in Davis at a gym that goes to Davis, California, that goes to 30. But there's some out there that go to 40 or 45%.
Yeah,
Uh,
Nordic
for St.
has a treadmill that goes to 40%, and my buddy bought it just to train for the Grand Canyon. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah.
What kind of
Yeah. It's a
shoes are
great
you wearing? You're wearing running shoes to do that?
on the treadmill.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would wear, I think I had like Hoka Rincons I was wearing on the treadmill, I think.
All right, cool.
I would wear road shoes.
Don't get any ideas, John.
Uh,
John
and
coaches
then
a lot are logged into this call, so you're just fueling the fire. I feel like we're all gonna have very long workouts coming up.
well,
I've never given anybody anything above like 5% incline. And people who've
Oh.
done more than 5% incline, I've always told them to drop it to 5.
oh, really? Yeah.
25% seems insane, but I'm guessing you're doing like 13-minute miles doing that, or what's
You know, I have it all written down in my phone. I'm trying to remember. I would go off miles per hour because that was the treadmill I was in. I would think I would do the fastest, like 1 or 2 minute intervals I would ever do would get up to like 6 minutes. Oh, 6 miles per hour. So that would be a 10-minute mile. I mean, that would be the absolute fastest. But I think most of my intervals were probably between 4.6 and 5.5 miles an hour. I would do, and then I'd have one workout per week that was zone 4. So I'd have none of the kind of intervals for that one would be longer than probably 6 minutes, and some of them would be as short as a minute. And yeah, shorter rest times on those, and the total volume of work on those would probably be between 16 to 22 minutes, I would say.
Wow.
So
So you're certainly an
I would
advocate for. Oh, I'm sorry.
Say again.
I was just gonna say you're
Go ahead. I'm done.
I was just gonna say that you're certainly an advocate about volume, because I'm taking a strength class right now just to catch on my CEUs for USA Triathlon, and the strength coach coaches a lot of triathletes, and he is not an advocate for volume. He's very much an advocate for keeping the volume low and keeping the strength training high. And I think depending on what coach or what methodology you look at, and I'm not saying one is right versus one is wrong. I think I'm more of an advocate for high volume myself personally as a coach. But it is interesting when you go out into the literature and you look at different coaches that there are some people that are high volume versus low volume. And it's just interesting to hear your point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm completely. I think there are some areas where the science hasn't quite caught up with practice and what actually works. I mean, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, and maybe this is completely off, but you know, some people have the ability to train at higher volumes than others, and I don't know if that's that could be because of other life stressors, that could be of like quality of their rest, of their diet, or just, you know, how personally prone they are to injury or a million other things. And I think if you can afford to train at a higher volume and you don't get burned out and you don't get injured, then it's better. But the people who train at a higher volume have a way higher chance of burning out, a way higher chance of getting injured, and it's like hard to blanket recommend that.
Yeah,
because
really good
already
point.
so many ultra runners get burned out. So,
No,
yeah,
really good point. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just to say that it should be suggested on an individual basis. You know, what works for one person does not work for another person, and I think that's what makes a coach so important. You know, I do have one person on this call who was looking for a coach with ultra running, and I said, you know, I think that's what makes training yourself versus training with a coach really important, because you brainstorm and realize that not everybody should read this book and do that training plan. You know, it should be individualized, and depending on if you're married, have kids, work, don't work, it should be really individualized. But so
yeah.
you touched a little bit on your volume. I'd really be interested to hear. Now it's race day. It's day that you're doing the FKT. What are you eating? What are you drinking? You know, what's race day mentality in that fashion?
Oh, geez, I am not a good person to talk to about this. I'm trying to remember, like and I would just say one other thing on that took me a while to realize because I was having some knee issues. Was I find the Hokas are very fast on the trail, because you're able to descend so quickly because there's so much cushioning. But I've found if I train all on Hokas, then I inevitably get knee and hip issues. So I love the Hokas, but typically the way I do it is I split my volume 50-50 between Hokas and something more minimal. Personally, I use a Solomon shoe, and I find just mixing up the amount of cushion, the shoe brand, the style of shoe, and everything else just goes a long way for injury prevention for me. And I noticed it. Like a couple months ago, I was running in Yosemite, and like I went like a couple of weeks running straight on Hokas, and all of a sudden, like I started to have issues again. I was like, oh my God, this is like actually a thing. It's not just in my head.
Yeah, smart. I think that goes back to you talking about training long distance on trails because it's proprioception. You're constantly in different directions, and if you're changing your shoes, your ankles and your feet are guessing how to work with different environments. And I think there's a strength training aspect to your ankles and ligaments in that perspective.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and so then on the race day, I mean, like a total disaster. Like the Prezi, the Prezi was an absolute mess because Andrew. So there's a dude, Andrew Drummond, who runs a ski shop up right in the White Mountains, right in Jackson, New Hampshire, Ski the Whites. And so he kind of like he talks to a lot of people who are doing these FKTs. And so I went up to him at the beginning of the summer and I told him like I was going to take each one of these efforts very intentionally, do each one of them properly. Because in the past, people would do them when it's raining, or people would make a wrong turn, and it was just ridiculous. Like this was Presidential Traverse, like the most competitive on the East Coast, and like no one was doing it properly. And so I told him that. And then in July, I went up and I spent a week and I like ran the Prezi like every day for a week straight. Um, that was like it was like 56,000 feet of gain, like 140 miles. It was like excessive. And then I went up there a couple weeks later and it rained every single day. And that July set like records in Boston for rainfall. And I went up and I had like I tapered for this, and I was being a little ridiculous and I probably should have just waited. But I drove up to New Hampshire from Connecticut, and there was a window. I don't like doing these things on the weekends because there's more people up there, but if the weather's going to be better, I might as well. Saturday looked good, and then it rained on Saturday, and then Sunday looked good, and then it rained on Sunday, and then Monday looked good, and it rained on Monday. And the whole time I'm just like sitting in my camper, just like going absolutely insane. And finally, like Tuesday, I had to be back out to work on Wednesday. And I got up Tuesday morning and it was drizzling on Mount Washington. It was raining, and like it's so technical and it's so rocky. It's like got to be perfectly dry to run it quickly. And I was like, you know what? I'm just like so sick of this. I'm just gonna run it. And the other thing I didn't realize was that was when all the wildfire smoke blew across from the West Coast. So the air quality was like the PM 2.5 like AQI on up there was like 150, and like I had a horrible headache the whole time. And I didn't realize it why until afterwards. But yeah, I ran it and I managed to beat the previous time, which was shocking to me. But yeah, no, it was a bad experience. And so typically like, yeah, that's like one thing I wish I could fix, because like I always get kind of anxious. The thing is I get like concerned about, I don't get concerned about the event. I get concerned about being anxious for it. And so then I'll be like anxious about being anxious, and then I won't be able to sleep. And it's just kind of frustrating every single time.
I think I can relate to that. I think the worst part is waiting for the event to actually occur.
Yeah,
And the sour stomach that comes with it, and then once you actually start racing, it's like you're in. You feel great. But wow, you had everything against you that day: the smoke, the rain. Does that make you want to go back up there and do it again on drier, nicer conditions? Or are you
no,
like, no,
I hated the Prezi. I'm done with the Prezi. The only one, the Great Range Traverse, I thought was like my best one, and the guy, not the guy I beat, but the guy who had the record before the guy I beat, if that makes sense. He went and beat my time like 2 months later by like 3 minutes. So that's the one I've always thought about. But it's like, I'm kind of like, I did my thing. It went perfectly that day. Like I would just have to go back with like more fitness.
Right. We'll talk about a small world. You just mentioned Andrew. We have Andrew's cousin on this chat who's on our team right now.
No way, really?
Yeah, Gretchen just texted me. She's on this call. She's on the team. You could say hi, Gretchen, if you want to. I don't know. Maybe she's shy.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, Andrew's the man. I really like him.
Yes. Yep.
Gretchen has a lot of background in cross country skiing, and her. I don't know, maybe you could touch on it, Gretchen, but her parents have a place up there for cross country skiing. She competed, semi professionally for a little bit, but she's got connections up there.
Oh, very
Yep.
cool.
Yep.
It's a great area.
Cool. So I think I just feel like everybody's going to want to ask a lot of questions, and if I keep going, then it's going to take away time from other people. So does anyone on here right now, like maybe I'll start with John. John, do you have any questions you want to ask Jack right now? Because I think if I keep going, then we'll go till 8 o'clock and we'll be out of time.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about your just daily nutrition and then the nutrition that you took for the actual one of your events?
Yeah. So as far as my daily nutrition, like it's kind of bipolar in many ways. Like I will try to eat. So I guess to start this, one thing that I think a lot of people don't like talking about, but I think should be addressed is, so when I finished SEAL training, I was 205 pounds, wanted to cut down to running, and I was like, okay, I need to be under 170. And so I like really heavily restricted calories. And I think most people would consider it like an eating disorder, but like it wasn't. I was like just like concerned about performance. I was like, I just need to like starve myself essentially. And I got down to 180 very easily, and then getting past 180 was very, very challenging. And I was under fueling all my workouts. My workouts were horrible, and it was just incredible. Like just like one after the other, just like all these injuries that I got. I had really bad runner's knee for a while. I had really bad Achilles tendonitis, and then eventually I was like starting to get into my race season. I was like, you know what? I just need to like eat intuitively and just kind of see what happens. And I came back up to 180, but all my workouts were going better. My injuries all cleaned themselves up. So I think everybody has like a natural distribution of muscle and fat to some extent, and everyone kind of has their own like fastest weight to race at, and that's probably going to be the weight that your body naturally sits at when you're training. But as far as my personal diet, I try to eat. I don't certainly nowhere near keto, but I try to eat. I would say more fats than the average person. Um, and then a lot of vegetables, a lot of whole grains, not a ton of protein. I would say, I mean, everything's relative, but I would say probably just under a gram per pound of body weight. So, I mean, for me, that's like, I guess it is a fair amount, probably about 150 to 180 grams a day, but relative to how many calories I'm eating, it's really not all that many. But I'll find that a lot of times when I'm doing an intensive training block, like I just won't be satiated by eating, healthy foods. And I'll have to just like, I could eat like a bowl of oatmeal and like my stomach will feel full, but I will not feel like I derived any energy from it. I'm actually satiated. So like sometimes I'll just have to like eat an inordinate amount of candy just to like, feel like I've consumed anything. Um, and then last summer I started eating vegetarian. I mean, partially this was because Jim Walmsley, who's like the best American ultra runner of all time, and then Killian, who we were talking about earlier, both of them are vegetarians. And honestly, like if they woke up every morning and like stuck a fork in an electrical outlet, like I would do the same thing. So yeah, I just kind of like thought that was a decent idea based on the fact they did it. Wasn't a lot of science to back it up, but I've been super, super happy with it so far. And then, for environmental and moral reasons also, it was important to me. And then so race day, I experimented with a lot of different stuff, but I found that Morton works best for me. And so both the powder and the gels. I don't really drink a lot of caffeine at all, period. On race day, maybe I'll have, I'm trying to think on the Whites 100. I mean, that was a 24-hour effort, so I did incorporate some caffeine into that. but it was only, I don't think it exceeded 100 milligrams every couple of hours. It really wasn't all that much. And then for some of the efforts this summer, I was just eating to hunger, which is nice because I was carrying a lot less. But towards the end of the summer, I kind of got more strict with it, and I started holding myself to 400 calories an hour of carbohydrates while I was racing, and I found I had way more energy doing that. So I would just, a gel would typically be 100 calories, and I would just kind of strictly hold myself to eating 100 calories every 15 minutes. And then on an effort longer than 5 hours, I'll carry like a, electrolyte pill of like salt and potassium, sodium and potassium salt, and I'll kind of have that to kind of cramping if I'm feeling it. Yeah.
When you said when you said the word keto and then said the word candy a little bit later, I'm trying to balance these two. So were you thinking like a keto?
Definitely not keto.
Yeah.
No, I would just say I eat more fat than the average person, like as
Okay.
far as like avocados and nut butters. But I don't. No, definitely not. I mean, I
So
insane amount of carbohydrates. Yeah.
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 Okay. So okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question that they want to ask? They can just go ahead and unmute themselves and ask, or I'll just keep zinging them.
I actually want to know the difference between a high altitude race and what would be like a normal environmental altitude. Like how taxing that is on the body and how you prepare for that.
Yeah. So, completely honest, I haven't raced really at all at altitude. I've raced actually a little bit at altitude, but the biggest reason is I feel like I'd like to do those races, and a lot of the mountain races in the US are at altitude, but you really need a couple weeks to effectively acclimatize, really 3 weeks to effectively acclimatize. And before this, I just really just didn't have the time. I think at altitude, people nutrition becomes more challenging. I think nutrition is usually a big problem at a hard rock, at a race where it's the average elevation is like 11,000 feet. And I think also, I'm don't know if this is accurate, but I think also people you consume a lot more fluids at altitude. Maybe the air is just drier at some of those mountain races. But when I did do some races at altitude. The effective way one way you can kind of acclimatize is by doing a lot of heat training, and really that's only because at altitude, obviously the volume of your blood increases, the red blood cell count increases, and so if you're training in heat a lot, then your blood volume will increase. So that's kind of part of that altitude adaptation. But beyond that, I mean, I actually bought an altitude tent because I was planning on living in Virginia longer, and I wanted to do some mountain races. So I did a race in Utah that went really, really well, and I trained a ton in the heat, and I slept in the tent at about 8,000 feet for about a month, and the race went really well for me. Didn't have any issues, but those are the only two strategies that I'm aware of. Basically the tent, and then heat training that I know of to kind of cope with that.
That's
Awesome.
cool.
Thank you.
So
yeah.
Did you like the tent, and would you suggest the tent to other like avid athletes? And you did 8,000 feet every night for a month?
Yeah. I mean, I like the tent. It makes the generator makes a ton of noise. It's kind of annoying. But I slept fine in it. I don't know how much of an advantage you'd have racing at sea level. Racing at altitude, I thought that it made a difference. Killian has done a ton of work with Hypoxico and a ton of work with that tent. And he said if a race was under, I can't remember what he said. He said like 4,000 meters. So like 14,000 feet. He said he would not use it. He said it didn't work. But I know Killian, I've read that he has trouble acclimatizing and sleeping at altitudes. Maybe it was recovery issues he was having or something. But personally, yeah, I like the 10. I don't think it would make a big difference though for racing at sea level. I don't know what the science is there.
Gotcha. I feel like that. Well, certainly, I think that heat training has an advantage at sea level just because of what you were talking about with increased blood plasma volume and all that.
Yeah.
I don't know much about the altitude and tense for sea level training, but
Mm-hmm.
if Killian says it, then I'm with him.
Yeah. Well, one thing I didn't realize that I thought I was just special, but I didn't realize how much more heat larger athletes produce. And so just I can't remember a fantastic book if anybody's like training running is like Running Lore. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this, but it's like, or Lore of Running. It's like a phone book. But it's like surprisingly readable and it's like it's really, really, really good. But they have a chart in here that's like heat production in, I don't know, watts or joules or something,
Yeah.
for athletes of different weights. And for heavier athletes, it's absolutely insane. So it's always an issue. I found I always race better when it's colder, because I think some of that heat generation is a little bit mitigated, but I found I always have to drink more, even proportionally more, or beyond proportionally more than smaller athletes. And then I find out that like I always have to like, race shirtless in like the tiniest shorts possible because like otherwise I absolutely incinerate. Um, so I think if you're a larger athlete, just like notice that and pay attention to it and just like take steps to like keep yourself cool because that's super, super important. Or if you're doing like a time trial, just like race it when it's colder or, in the early morning or something.
Racing your speedo, you just race naked, and that
Race the
mitigates
speed.
the heat.
Yeah.
It's funny you talk about metabolic heat production, right? How much heat the body produces when you're exercising, and they do measure it in watts, which is interesting because I did a metabolic heat test in the lab at Corey Stringer Institute, and they were giving me my watt outputs around 700, 800 watts, and at first I looked at it and I was like, what, 700, 800 watts? Like, FTP for Chris Froome is 420, 430, but it's on a completely different scale. It's totally different, but it is interesting to see the watts and see you're totally right. The heavier you are, the more metabolic heat you produce. That's why sweat volume and the amount of fluid that you lose while exercising is much higher for someone who weighs more, and why someone who weighs more is at a higher risk of heat stroke than someone who weighs much less. And there are formulas for it too. So it is pretty easy to predict depending on your weight.
And I don't know what it is just interesting that some of the fastest mountain 100 milers right now. So Francois Dane, Jim Walmsley, Dylan Bowman a little bit. All those dudes are like 6'2" to like 6'4". Like they're not small guys. They're big. So I mean, the ideal height for the marathon, I don't know what, like 5'5", 5'6", or something like, pretty short. But like, it seems like maybe with the longer distances, there might be some hidden advantage. I found personally on really technical terrain, if you're taller and you can take longer strides, it's just less, decent foot placements that you need. So if you're on really technical stuff and there's, within the next 20 feet, there's 10, good foot placements. And if you only have to find, 3 of them, that's way faster than having to find, 8 of them. So that longer stride can really help on technical terrain.
I agree with that. Yeah, that makes
So.
sense. Yeah, Walmsley, I remember watching Walmsley at the Golden Trail Championships. I think it was in the Azores. And they were talking about how maybe they were saying that they weren't sure if he was a great technical athlete, but he was very good in the mountains and compared to some people that were there. But
I think what technical races he's done. It's not very many.
Yeah.
I think like Telluride Mountain Run in Colorado is pretty technical. He might have I think he has a course record there, but
wow. Anyone else for a question right now? Ryan Hall, come on, you got to have a question. You're like the king of downhill mountain running. He's probably taking care of his kids. What about Aris? I feel like you got to have a question.
Yeah, I do. I'm not as technically sound as all you folks are. And I'll pop my video on here. I'm in a dungeon down in the basement. Um, Jack, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. I'm Eris Ristow, I guess an aspiring ultra runner, but um, can you talk a little bit about that transition that you talked about? You said you went from training mostly anaerobic to aerobic. Um,
Yeah.
and has that slowed you down, and was that a frustrating process for you at all?
No, so let me clarify. So I was my training volume. So when I was training for those shorter efforts, my training volume, like so on my like average kind of like peak build weeks. So this was like a couple months prior to my first race, and then I was doing these efforts um about a month apart. And so typically what I would do was I would race it, and all these efforts were between, well, except for some of them were longer, but mainly between like 3 to 5 hours. I would race the effort. I would take a couple days completely off, and then I would go like right back into my training, basically at my peak. And then I would train there for about 2.5 weeks, and then I would start my taper for the next effort, really. And so those peak build weeks, all those peak weeks were about 24 hours a week, and of that, um, there was about uh, there was about 60 to 80 minutes of work in zone 3 and about 18 to 22 minutes in zone 4. The rest of it was all zone 1, even then. And now I'm training, um, 24 to 28 hours a week probably. And all of it is in zone 1, except for an hour, which is probably uh, zone 2, zone 3, the muscular endurance work. So yeah, for some people that are aerobically deficient, that are too reliant on their anaerobic system, that are doing all of their training anaerobic, then yeah, that can be a frustrating thing to kind of have to take a step back and train train aerobically and train essentially more slowly for a while as they kind of work their aerobic system up. But that's not really what I was personally kind of going through there. Um, yeah, but I mean, the biggest thing is like, the marathon is run in zone 2. You can go incredibly zone 2. Like I think people think of it as like, if they're thinking of like a 5 zone or 4 zone system, zone 2 seems so low intensity. But when you remember that like a marathon is run in zone 2, I mean, it's actually quite can be quite challenging, especially for athletes that are super well trained, where their difference between their zone 2 and their zone 3, and even their zone 4 is relatively is pretty small. Um, does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah, it does, Jack. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Thank
I
you.
think that's a really good question too, and a good point to bring up, because I think a lot of us triathletes, a type A personality, we all want to spend as much time zone 3 above threshold zone 4, because we think that that's what's really going to push our threshold higher, even though we know the literature and the science points towards 80-20 method, or spending more time holding back. So it's nice to hear a point of view from someone like you that really talks to the benefit of staying down in that zone 1, zone 2.
Yeah. And I guess if I was, doing 24 hours a week and about 80 minutes of it was high intensity, I mean, that is, probably about 6% 94% was zone 1.
Wow,
6% was higher intensity. So
that's interesting. That's cool.
very, yeah.
Let me ask you a theoretical question that you're maybe not going to like.
Uh-oh.
Let's say you have 6 hours of training a week. Would you do it all zone 1 if you were training for a 100-mile ultra? Or would you push up the intensity and get the VO2 max as high as possible with like 6 to 10 hours a week versus 24?
Yeah. So if I was just training 6 hours a week, and I would do 5 of it in, I think honestly I would do 5 of it in zone 1, and then I'd have 1 hour of that I was doing. I would do muscular endurance work. I would do weighted work on a Stairmaster. And Uphill Athlete, they have an article on their site where they talk about the head coach, the one who coached cross country. He worked with Luke Nelson, who's a pretty big mountain ultra runner, to do a race in Italy, Tour de Jean, which is like, it's like 200 miles and like 80,000 feet of climbing, I think. And Luke was training. I mean, I think his peak weeks were like, it was something crazy, like 12 hours, I think 12 hours a week or something like that for that. And they completely credit it to that, to doing this muscular endurance work. So Luke was hiking up and down a hill that was probably like a 30 to 40% grade with a weighted pack on. And he was doing it both up and down because he was trying to also get some of that, some of the strength in his quads coming downhill, doing that. But they weren't training very much a week, and it was all that weighted work, and then the rest of his work was all zone one that he was doing. So that's personally probably how I would do it.
I think it's another really good question because there's some people that can only work out 7 or 8 hours a week because they have a family, and how do they break that up versus someone who has more spare time and can train 16 to 20 hours a week? Does the percentage of intensity on both ends look the same? So I think it's important to say no, it doesn't, depending on the person and the time that they have. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. I mean, I would still kind of stick. I wouldn't probably go past 80-20, as far as, high intensity or low intensity to high intensity. But as you start to have more time, you can just start kind of increasing that low intensity number. But yeah, uphill athlete is loves the muscular endurance work, and I've had really good results with it personally. So I think it's huge.
Love it.
And really, the trick is using a high enough weight and going on steep enough terrain where the legs are the limiter, and it's not the cardiovascular system.
Yeah, that makes me think of the low cadence, like 50 to 60 RPMs on the bike, over.
Yeah.
Which is funny because there's a lot of people out there right now, like Dylan Johnson is a guy on YouTube who's talking a lot about training with bicycle racing and all that. And he's brought up a lot of research that has showed that maybe it's not effective. But
oh, really?
But I think personally it has been for me, if not even mentally, just knowing that you can work, continue to work on top of tired legs. But I think there is a lot of benefit to a lot of that training. So it's nice to hear your point of view on that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Does anyone else have a question before I let him go real quick?
Not a question, just saying thanks. It's been intriguing to say the least, but you're done incredible stuff. Thanks. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you guys.
Ditto on that, Jack. Yeah, you're absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed having you here, and I'm really looking forward to following you this summer. Can you tell people if they want to find you? Like, I know that Eris was interested in some coaching, and some people are interested in some resources. So maybe you could give us a couple places where we could follow you if we're interested in hearing more. Where we could look into that.
Yeah, so basically the only social media I maintain is my Instagram. But I have a document that I give all my athletes that I can send. I have 2 of them that I can send you guys. One of them is nutrition based, and one of them is kind of on uphill athletes kind of methodology. And the latter document on uphill athletes methodology is really tailored to someone I'm coaching, but I think anybody be able to glean something from it. I think also I built all my training off of uphill athletes book, training for the uphill athlete. And then my document on nutrition. I mean, obviously I'm not a nutritionist, and it's just, some like super basic tips and things that I've noticed kind of throughout my time running and my time in the Navy. And then I just like pulled some stuff that Killian has talked about online about nutrition.
Cool.
But yeah, Instagram is my own social media, and those 2 documents. Yeah.
Hey, David, I do have one question. What are you doing for recovery, Jack? How are you doing self-care? What are you doing for, in between for recovery and whatnot?
Yeah. So I'm like I'm like, that's my biggest thing is like recovery. And like, if I can't recover from like a workout or something, I'm like I don't do it. I fly very rarely. Whenever I fly, I always try to fly during the day if I can. Even if it would mean like when I was working like a Monday through Friday job, even if it was meant like losing a day on the weekend, just because I knew I was going to destroy my sleep if I tried to take a red eye or something like that. So I try to sleep. Ideally, I try to sleep 9 hours a night. I try to stay off my feet as much as possible. I try to reduce, like actively, proactively reduce kind of like external stressors as much as I can. But I mean, like, I'm sure everybody here knows, but the difference I would find when I was in the Navy, and even if I was just during the day before I worked out, even if I was just like standing around or walking around, like nothing physically intense, the difference in the quality of my workout versus if I was just sitting all morning would be enormous. And so just like trying to stay off my feet as much as possible was a huge thing I do all the time. Trying to think. I mean, the research, it seems like the research on stretching is very mixed. It seems like a lot of people anecdotally like it, but there's like no data to back it up. Maybe I'm completely crazy here, but I have found personally stretching after my workouts is something I do, and I think it helps a little bit with injury prevention. Yeah, I think that's probably
Any
everything.
do you take any supplements?
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I take like Move Free. It's like a glucosamine based joint supplement. I take fish oil. I take vitamin B12 just because I don't eat meat. I take melatonin every night. I take tart cherry extract, which is, to be completely honest, I don't even know what it does, but it was recommended to me along with turmeric by the SEAL kind of like physical therapy people. And so I was like, well, whatever, I'll just eat it. Doesn't cost that much. And then, I mean, this probably isn't a great idea, and I can't really recommend anybody do this, but I also take, I have a iron supplement that's like 400% of my daily value, and I cut the pill in half, and I take half of it every other day. So essentially 100% of my daily value of iron every day. And that's because, I don't eat anymore. I don't eat any beef, so I'm not pulling any iron from that. I know a lot of iron that you could get from spinach or vegetables like isn't quite as readily absorbed. So I take an iron along with vitamin C because a lot of runners have an iron deficiency, partially because of like just the impact on your feet physically destroys the red blood vessels in your capillaries in your feet. At least that's what I've read. So I've taken an iron supplement for about a year, but taking too much iron is extremely toxic, and a lot of people end up with toxicity from doing that. So I don't really recommend doing that, but I personally do it.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott, for the question. And I think that was really good to hear, because I think a lot of people on this team know what good recovery looks like, but we just can't follow the rules. we can't do it, whether it's to a job or, our daily habits. But I think it's really good to hear your point of view on recovery and really trying to sit down and relax, and how much that benefits your exercise and your activity is good to hear.
Yeah, it's huge. And I can't tell you how many times like I would get out of work, I'd be like tired from just like being, doing whatever BS the Navy had me doing for the day. And I would just like lay down for a little while. I would eat something, I would read or something like that, something to kind of decompress. And that would be a day I already basically wrote it off as a day I was just gonna take as a rest day, and I would kind of just like, I don't know what, just kind of resurrect myself just by lying down for a bit and recovering, and be able to get the workout in. I don't really plan out any of my rest days. I just kind of feel it out day to day. And if I don't feel good, I'll just take the day completely off. And then I typically don't do deload like entire weeks. So I won't do like 3 weeks up, 1 week down. I'll just kind of like pay attention to my schedule. And when I notice I've had a bunch of weeks kind of strung together of higher intensity and I'm feeling kind of run down, I'll just take, 3 or 4 days super low, and then just kind of bring it right back up to where I was.
Yeah. I think there's something important listening to your body sometimes, rather than just going to a plan. So I agree with that. I think that's good.
100%.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate you talking to the team. That was super fascinating. You're such a great guy. I can't wait to see what you do this summer and to continue following you. And we'll talk soon. I'm going to try to get an address from you so we can send you some team swag and some goodies.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
Cool.
good stuff. But thank you so much, Jack. Really
Yeah,
appreciate
of course.
it. Pleasure having you
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jack.
Yeah.
Cool,
Yeah.
guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for logging on. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
All right.
All right. Good night. See ya.
Good luck to
See you
you.
guys.
Cheers.
See you
Hey,
later.
thank you.
Yo, thanks for logging on.
So
How-
I owe you an apology based on all that.
Why?
So, well, because everything I do is anaerobic, and he's talking about anaerobic work and whatever, and then he's like, no, and then you got to stick to zone one. I'm like, fuck.
Zone one, dude.
Like shit.